is Cassandra Mitchell, and I've always been good at keeping things together. My apartment, my career, my relationships, everything in its place, everything under control. At least, that's what everyone thought. The truth is, I've been holding myself together with metaphorical tape and glue for as long as I can remember, smiling when I should cry, nodding when I should scream, agreeing when I should object. It's exhausting, this constant maintenance of the perfect facade, but I've never known any other way to be, until the day everything fell apart. It was a Tuesday. Tuesdays are supposed to be ordinary, forgettable, just another step on the long staircase from weekend to weekend. But this particular Tuesday changed everything. I was at work, sitting in my corner office at the marketing firm, where I'd climbed the ranks to become the youngest creative director in company history. My desk was immaculate, my presentation ready, my outfit carefully selected to convey confidence without intimidation. Perfect, as always. The meeting with our biggest client was scheduled for 2 p.m. I'd been preparing for weeks, fine-tuning the campaign that would surely secure their business for another year. My team was counting on me. My boss was counting on me. At 1:45 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced down, expecting it to be from my assistant confirming the conference room was ready. Instead, it was from James, my fiancé of 3 years. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." 7 words. 7 simple words that shattered the carefully constructed reality I'd been maintaining. I stared at the screen, certain I'd misunderstood. James and I were getting married in 4 months. We'd sent out the invitations just last week. We'd put a deposit on a house in the suburbs. We had a future planned. For God's sake, I called him immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Straight to voicemail. I texted back. No response. The room started to spin, the walls closing in. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My perfect life was unraveling with each passing second, and I had a meeting in 12 minutes. Somehow, I made it through that meeting. I delivered the presentation on autopilot, smiling at all the right moments, answering questions with a confidence I no longer felt. No one seemed to notice that I was breaking into a million pieces right in front of them. The client loved the campaign. My boss congratulated me. My team celebrated, and I excused myself to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and finally let the tears come. When I got home that evening, James was gone. So were his clothes, his books, his ridiculous collection of vintage vinyl records. All that remained was a letter on the kitchen counter and his key to our apartment. The letter was long, filled with phrases like "grown apart" and "different paths" and "care about you deeply." But what it really said was that he'd met someone else, someone spontaneous, someone who didn't plan every moment of her life, someone who knew how to live in the moment instead of constantly preparing for the future. Her name was Willow. She was a yoga instructor. They'd been seeing each other for 6 months. 6 months, half a year of lies, of betrayal, of me planning a wedding to a man who was already gone. I should have screamed, should have raged, should have thrown things and called him and demanded an explanation face to face. That's what a normal person would do, right? But I didn't. Instead, I carefully folded the letter, placed it back in its envelope, and put it in the drawer where I kept important documents. Then I cleaned the apartment, ordered Thai food, and went to bed at my usual time. Perfect Cassandra, keeping it together even when her life was falling apart. The next morning, I woke up at 6 a.m. as usual, went for my 5-mile run, showered, dressed, and went to work. I didn't tell anyone about James. I didn't cancel any wedding plans. I just continued. For 3 weeks, I maintained this charade. I smiled at colleagues who asked about wedding preparations. I nodded when my mother called to discuss flower arrangements. I even attended a cake tasting alone, telling the baker that James was out of town on business. I was fine, completely fine, until I wasn't. The breaking point came on another Tuesday, exactly 1 month after James's text message. I was at my desk, reviewing copy for a new campaign, when my assistant knocked on my door. "This just arrived for you," she said, placing a large envelope on my desk. "It looks important." I thanked her, warped the envelope, and found myself staring at a series of legal documents. James was selling our apartment. My name was on the lease too, but he'd put down the deposit, paid the majority of the rent. He was giving me 30 days to find a new place. Something inside me snapped. I don't remember much of what happened next. There was a roaring in my ears, a red haze over my vision. I remember standing up, knocking over my perfectly organized desk, papers flying everywhere. I remember screaming, loud and long and completely unhinged. I remember my assistant's face, shocked and afraid, as she backed out of my office. Lesson 1 in the art of falling apart. Feel your feelings. All of them. Even the ugly ones. Zoe brought over a stack of plates from the kitchen. Cheap, ceramic ones I'd bought at IKEA when I first moved in. "These are from before James, right?" she asked. I nodded, confused. "Good," she said, and handed me a plate. "Now throw it against the wall." I laughed, thinking she was joking, but her expression remained serious. "I'm not going to throw a plate," I said. "That's ridiculous, and messy, and childish." "Exactly," Zoe replied. "It's messy and childish, and completely irrational, just like anger, just like heartbreak, just like all the feelings you've been stuffing down for the past month. So throw the damn plate, Cassandra." I held the plate in my hands, feeling its weight, running my fingers along its smooth edge. This was crazy. I was not the kind of person who threw things. I was reasonable, rational, in control. But I wasn't in control, was I? My fiancé had left me for a yoga instructor named Willow. I was about to be homeless. I'd had a mental breakdown in front of my entire office. My carefully constructed life had crumbled like a house of cards. So I threw the plate. It shattered against the wall with a satisfying crash, pieces flying in all directions. The sound was like a starting gun. Suddenly, I wanted to break everything. Zoe handed me another plate, and I threw it harder, and another, and another. With each crash, I screamed out all the words I'd been holding back. "I hate you, James." Crash. 6 months, 6 fucking months. Crash. I could text message. "You ended 3 years with a text." Crash. By the time we ran out of plates, I was breathing hard, tears streaming down my face, but I felt lighter somehow, like I'd released a pressure valve I didn't know was there. "Better?" Zoe asked, surveying the destruction with satisfaction. I nodded, wiping my face with the back of my hand. "Better, but now we have to clean this up." Zoe laughed. "That's lesson 2, she said. "Some messes can wait." Lesson 2, not everything needs to be fixed immediately. Some things need time. We weighed the broken plates where they were and ordered pizza. We ate it straight from the box, sitting on the floor of my living room, drinking wine from coffee mugs because I couldn't bear to look at the wine glasses James and I had picked out together. "You know what you need to do tomorrow," Zoe said, licking sauce from her fingers in a way that would have horrified our mother. "You need to call all those wedding vendors and cancel everything. The thought made my stomach clench. I can't, I said. It's too final. It is final, Cass, Zoe said gently. James is gone. The wedding is off. Pretending otherwise isn't going to change that. I knew she was right, but the thought of those phone calls explaining over and over that there would be no wedding, hearing the pity in their voices was overwhelming. I'll help you, Zoe offered, as if reading my mind. We'll do it together, and then we'll burn the wedding dress. We are not burning my wedding dress, I protested. It cost a fortune. Zoe grinned. Fine, we'll sell it and use the money for a sister's trip somewhere fabulous. But the point is, you need to let go of the future you had planned with James. It's not happening, Cass, and the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can start figuring out what comes next. The next day, we made those calls. It was every bit as awful as I'd anticipated, but Zoe was right there beside me, squeezing my hand when my voice faltered, taking over when I couldn't continue. By the end of the day, the wedding was officially canceled. The dream was dead, and strangely, I felt relieved. Lesson 3. Letting go, create space for something new. Zoe stayed with me for a week, guiding me through what she called my controlled demolition. We packed up James's remaining belongings and dropped them off at his friend's place, where he was apparently staying until he moved in with Willow. We redecorated my bedroom, replacing the neutral colors James had preferred with the bold blues and purples I'd always loved. We even cleaned up the broken plates, but not before Zoe insisted we take a photo of the mess to remind you that sometimes breaking things can be healing. When Zoe finally went back to her own apartment, I felt stronger, more centered, more me, not the perfect, controlled version of me I'd been presenting to the world, but something more authentic, still broken, still hurting, but no longer pretending otherwise. I called Karen and asked if I could come back to work. She suggested a gradual return, part-time at first, building back up to my full responsibilities. I was surprised by her understanding, but grateful. Work had always been my safe place, the one area of my life where I felt completely in control. I needed that now more than ever. My first day back was awkward, to say the least. People didn't know whether to mention my meltdown or pretend it never happened. Most chose the latter, treating me with a careful politeness that was almost worse than outright gossip. Almost everyone, that is, except for Nate from the art department. Nate had joined the company about 6 months ago, transferring from our West Coast office. I didn't know him well. Our departments intersected occasionally, but not often. I knew he was talented, that he had a dry sense of humor, that he brought his dog to the office on the days when that was allowed. But beyond that, he was just another colleague, until he stopped by my office on my first day back, leaned against the doorframe, and said, "So, I heard you lost your shit spectacularly. Welcome to the club." I looked up, startled by his directness. "Excuse me," he grinned, not at all put off by my cold tone. "The Falling Apart Club," he clarified. "It's very exclusive. Members only. You get in by having a complete breakdown in a public place. I had mine at my sister's wedding 3 years ago. Open bar, bad breakup, ill-advised karaoke. Not my finest hour. Despite myself, I felt a smile tugging at my lips. "Sounds memorable," I said. "Oh, it was," he assured me. "There's video. My family watches it every Christmas, like some sort of traumatic holiday tradition." He straightened up from the doorframe. Anyway, I just wanted to say welcome back, and that it gets easier, the whole picking up the pieces thing. Before I could respond, he was gone, leaving me to stare after him in confusion. Had Nate from the art department just comforted me in his own strange way. The interaction stayed with me for the rest of the day, a bright spot in an otherwise tense return. There was something refreshing about his honesty, his willingness to acknowledge the elephant in the room without making it a big deal. No pity, no awkwardness, just simple recognition of a shared human experience. Sometimes we fall apart and then we put ourselves back together. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into the search for a new apartment. With the wedding canceled, I had more savings than I'd realized, money that had been earmarked for flowers and photographers and a honeymoon in Bali. Now it would go toward a security deposit, new furniture, a fresh start. I found a place in a different neighborhood, smaller than the apartment I'd shared with James, but with character: exposed brick walls, hardwood floors, large windows that flooded the space with light. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like somewhere I could heal, somewhere I could learn to be this new version of myself. Moving day arrived, and to my surprise, so did Nate. He showed up at my old apartment with coffee and donuts, sleeves rolled up, ready to help. "What are you doing here?" I asked, confused. "Zoe invited me," he said, handing me a coffee. "We met at the company holiday party last year. Kept in touch. She said you could use another pair of hands today." I made a mental note to kill my sister later. She hadn't mentioned inviting anyone else, let alone Nate from the art department, but I couldn't deny that extra help would be welcome, especially for moving the heavier furniture. "Well, thanks," I said, taking the coffee. "I appreciate it." Nate shrugged, as if giving up his Saturday to help a colleague move was no big deal. "Happy to help. Plus, I'm curious to see if your organizational skills extend to packing boxes. I bet you've got everything labeled and color-coded, don't you?" I felt my cheeks warm. He wasn't wrong. Each box was meticulously labeled with its contents and destination room. I'd even created a spreadsheet tracking what was in each box. "There's nothing wrong with being organized," I said defensively. Nate's smile was gentle, teasing without malice. "Didn't say there was. It's actually refreshing. Last time I moved, I threw everything into garbage bags the night before. Took me weeks to find my toothbrush. I couldn't help but laugh at that." "That sounds chaotic." "That's me," he agreed cheerfully. "Chaotic but functional. Most of the time. Anyway, Zoe arrived a few minutes later, and the three of us set to work. To my surprise, Nate and Zoe worked well together, their banter light and easy. I found myself relaxing in their company, even laughing as Nate told stories about his own disastrous move. By the time we finished loading the truck, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The new apartment was a blank canvas. As we unpacked, I made spontaneous decisions about where furniture should go, where pictures should hang, not measuring, not overthinking, just feeling what seemed right. It was liberating, this small act of impulsivity. When everything was unloaded, Zoe announced she had plans for the evening. "Hot date," she explained with a wink. "You two can handle the unpacking, right?" Before I could protest, she was gone, leaving me alone with Nate in my new, box-filled apartment. I had a sneaking suspicion this had been her plan all along. "You don't have to stay," I told him. "You've already done more than enough." "Are you kidding?" Nate replied, opening another box, and missed the chance to see inside the mind of Cassandra Mitchell. "No way. Your book collection." alone is going to tell me more about you than a year of office small talk. He wasn't wrong about that either. My books were my most personal possessions, dog-eared paperbacks, pristine hardcovers, everything from classic literature to guilty pleasure romance novels. I'd never let James organize my bookshelves, insisting on doing it myself, in my own particular way. Fine, I said, trying to sound put upon but secretly pleased to have the company. But I'm ordering pizza. It's the least I can do. Make it pizza and beer, and you've got a deal, Nate countered. We spent the evening unpacking books and hanging pictures, talking easily about work and movies and music. I learned that Nate had moved from San Francisco after a bad breakup, seeking a fresh start on the opposite coast, that his dog, a rescue mutt named Einstein, had been his emotional support through the worst of it, that he loved his job but hated office politics, preferred rainy days to sunny ones, and could quote entire scenes from obscure 80s movies. In turn, I found myself sharing things I rarely talked about, my childhood dream of becoming a writer, abandoned for a more practical career path, my complicated relationship with my perfectionist mother, my fear of disappointing others, of not measuring up to expectations. So that's why you're so, Nate gestured vaguely at me, searching for the right word. Uptight, I suggested dryly. Controlling, obsessively organized. I was going to say structured, he corrected with a smile. But yeah, those two. I should have been offended, but there was something about his honesty that I found refreshing. No one in my life had ever been this direct with me. Not James, not my colleagues, not even Zoe, who tiptoed around certain subjects despite her outspokenness in other areas. I'm trying to be less structured, I admitted. It's not easy. Why would it be? Nate asked, handing me a book to shelve. You've spent your whole life being one way. Change is hard, necessary sometimes, but never easy. I looked at him curiously. You sound like you're speaking from experience. He shrugged, his expression turning thoughtful. Let's just say I've had my own journey with falling apart and putting myself back together. Different circumstances, same process. I wanted to ask more, but something in his tone suggested the topic was closed, at least for now. So instead, I asked about Einstein, and Nate's face lit up as he pulled out his phone to show me pictures. By the time he left, it was past midnight, and my new apartment was taking shape, not perfect, not completely unpacked, but beginning to feel like home. Thanks for your help, I said, walking him to the door, and the conversation. Nate smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in a way that made my stomach do an unexpected flip. Anytime, he said. That's what fellow members of the Falling Apart Club are for. After he left, I sat on my new couch in my new apartment, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, and realized I'd spent an entire evening not thinking about James. Not once, not even for a moment. Lesson 4. Healing happens when you're not looking. The weeks that followed were a blur of work and settling into my new place. I established new routines, explored my new neighborhood, gradually adjusted to life as a single woman rather than half of a couple. It wasn't always easy, but it was, for the first time in years, perhaps in my entire adult life, I was making choices based solely on what I wanted, not what was expected of me or what would please others. At work, I found a new rhythm. I was still dedicated, still thorough, still the youngest creative director in company history, but I was also more flexible, more willing to consider unconventional ideas, more open to collaboration. My team seemed to respond positively to this new approach, bringing more creativity to our projects, taking more risks. After helping me move, he became a regular presence in my life. We'd grab lunch together at work, text about random things throughout the day, occasionally meet up on weekends to explore the city or watch a movie. It was friendship. I told myself, just friendship. I wasn't ready for anything more. And besides, Nate had never indicated he saw me as anything other than a friend until the night of the company holiday party. Exactly 3 months after my public meltdown, I debated not going. The thought of facing everyone in a social setting, of making small talk and pretending everything was fine, was daunting. But Zoe insisted I needed to reclaim my narrative, whatever that meant, and Karen hinted that my presence would be noticed and appreciated by the higher-ups. So I bought a new dress, emerald green, bold in a way I'd never have chosen when I was with James, and prepared to face the music. Nate found me at the bar, nursing a glass of champagne and trying to look like I was enjoying myself. "You clean up nice," he said, his eyes taking in the dress, the heels, the effort I'd put into my appearance. "Thanks," I replied, trying to ignore the flutter in my stomach at his appreciative gaze. "You don't look so bad yourself." It was an understatement. Nate in a suit was distracting. The casual, slightly rumpled artist was transformed into something else entirely, still unmistakably Nate, with his tousled hair and easy smile, but polished, refined, unexpectedly elegant. "Dance with me," he asked, holding out his hand. I hesitated. Dancing felt intimate, dangerous somehow, but the alternative was standing awkwardly at the bar, fielding pitying looks from colleagues who knew about James. So I took his hand and let him lead me to the dance floor. The band was playing something slow and jazzy, the kind of music that requires partners to stand close together. Nate's hand was warm at the small of my back, his other hand holding mine as we swayed to the music. I could smell his cologne, subtle and spicy, and feel the solid warmth of him against me. "You know," he said, conversationally, as if we were discussing the weather and not dancing so close. I could feel his breath on my hair. "I've wanted to do this since the first time I saw you." I looked up, startled. "What?" "Dance with you," he clarified, his eyes meeting mine. Among other things, my heart was suddenly pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "Since when?" I managed to ask. "Since my first day at the office," he said simply. "You were giving a presentation to the Johnson team. You were so poised, so in control, so completely in your element. I was impressed and intrigued." I shook my head, not understanding. "But that was before everything fell apart, before you saw me at my worst." Nate's hand tightened slightly at my waist. "Cassandra," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Your worst is more authentic and appealing than most people's carefully curated best. And besides, I liked you then. I like you now. I like all the versions of you I've gotten to know." I didn't know what to say to that. No one had ever expressed interest in the real me, the messy, imperfect, sometimes falling apart me. James had fallen in love with perfect Cassandra, and when the cracks in that façade began to show, he'd found someone else. "I'm not ready," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "I'm still healing." Sanat nodded, no disappointment or frustration in his expression. "I know," he said, "and that's okay. I'm not going anywhere. Cassandra, when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here. Until then, I'm happy just being in your life." We continued dancing, the moment settling between us like a promise. Not now, but maybe someday. And for the first time since James's text message, I found myself looking forward to the future rather than dreading it. Lesson 5. The heart heals at its own pace. You can't rush it, and you can't force it. you can only listen to. Winter turned to spring, and with the changing season came a sense of renewal. I was thriving at work, taking on challenging new projects, and mentoring younger team members. My apartment had become a true home, filled with books and art and plants, things that brought me joy. I'd even started writing again, short stories and poems that I shared with no one but kept in a journal beside my bed. And Nate was patient, true to his word. He remained a constant in my life without pushing for more. We spent time together, grew closer, built a foundation of friendship and trust. Sometimes I caught him looking at me in a way that made my pulse quicken, but he never crossed the line I'd drawn that night at the holiday party, until the day I was ready to cross it myself. It happened on a rainy Sunday in April. We were at my apartment. Nate sprawled on my couch reading a book, me curled in an armchair with my laptop, working on a story. Einstein was asleep on the floor between us, having become a regular visitor to my pet-friendly building. Rain pattered against the windows, and the apartment was filled with the scent of the bread we baked earlier. My first attempt at baking, guided by Nate's surprisingly competent instructions. It was such a simple moment, so ordinary and yet so perfect. I looked up from my writing to find Nate already watching me, a soft expression on his face. "What?" I asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Do I have flour on my face or something?" He shook his head, smiling that crooked smile that always made my heart skip. "No," he said. "I was just thinking that you look happy, peaceful. It's a good look on you." And in that moment, I realized he was right. I was happy, not the carefully constructed happiness I'd convinced myself I had with James, but a genuine, bone-deep contentment that came from being exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do, with exactly the right person beside me. "I am happy," I said softly, "and I'm ready." Nate's book lowered slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "Ready for what?" he asked, though I think he knew. I set my laptop aside and coursed the room to sit beside him on the couch. "Ready for this," I said, and leaned in to kiss him. It was a gentle kiss, tentative at first, then deepening as Nate's arms came around me, pulling me closer. When we finally broke apart, both a little breathless, I rested my forehead against his. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice husky, because I meant what I said. "I can wait." "I'm sure," I replied, and I was, more sure than I'd been about anything in a long time. I've spent my whole life trying to be perfect, Nate, trying to avoid mess and pain and uncertainty. But you've shown me that there's beauty in the broken places, in the imperfect moments. You've taught me the art of falling apart, and the art, putting myself back together in a way that feels true. He smiled, his hand coming up to cup my cheek. "You did that yourself, Cassandra. I just had the privilege of watching." "Well," I said, leaning into his touch, "I'm hoping you'll stick around to watch what comes next." His answer was another kiss, this one deeper, more certain, a promise of all the possibilities that lay ahead. Lesson 6, the most important lesson of all. Sometimes you have to fall completely apart to discover who you truly are. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find someone who loves all the pieces, even the broken ones, especially the broken ones. 1 year to the day after James's text message, I stood in my apartment, our apartment now, since Nate had moved in 3 months ago, and looked at the life we'd built together. Einstein was curled up on his dog bed in the corner, gray muzzle resting on his paws. Nate's art supplies were scattered across the dining table, a project in progress. My latest short story, accepted by a literary magazine, was framed on the wall. Nate's idea, his way of celebrating my rediscovered passion for writing. It wasn't a perfect life. We argued sometimes, Nate's creative chaos clashing with my need for order, my tendency to overthink bumping up against his impulsivity. We were still learning each other, still figuring out how to blend our very different approaches to life, but it was real, and it was ours. Nate came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. "Penny for your thoughts," he murmured. I leaned back against him, savoring the solid warmth of him. "I was just thinking about how has changed in a year," I said. "About how what felt like the end of the world turned out to be the beginning of something better." He pressed a kiss to my temple. "The universe has a funny way of working things out sometimes," he agreed. "Though for the record, I'm still not a fan of how much pain you had to go through to get here." I turned in his arms to face him. "I wouldn't change it," I said honestly. "Any of it. The pain, the breakdown, the falling apart. It all led me here. To this life. To you." Nate smiled. That crooked smile that still made my heart skip a beat. "Well, when you put it that way," he said, and kissed me, a kiss full of promise and possibility and all the tomorrows stretching out before us. And in that moment, I understood the final lesson in the art of falling apart. Sometimes breaking is just the beginning of becoming who you were always meant to be. If Cassandra's journey of breaking down and rebuilding resonated with your own perfectly imperfect life, please share this story with someone who might need permission to fall apart. Your support through likes and subscriptions helps our channel create more authentic stories that remind us all that sometimes the most beautiful transformations begin with letting go. Join our storytelling family as we explore the messy, real, and ultimately hopeful art of being human.